in any of the 6 sites, the picture shifts automatically to that site. So stay silent until it's your turn to speak. So you have these asteroids, and some of them are coming in towards the Earth and are going to be near misses or actual hits. And we have to decide what is to be done about it. Can we go out and either destroy? If you hit an incoming asteroid, all that happens is that it splits into fragments, and that becomes even more dangerous because all those fragments then are dangers. Or should you just nudge it so that it leaves the orbit which is bringing it to hit the Earth, and nudge it away so that it misses the Earth? All these are very difficult problems, and they are being dealt with as global emergencies, among others, by the World Federation of Scientists. And so we are obviously in front of an entirely new phenomenon of outer space. And it calls for new rules, new definitions, new vistas, and new understanding on the part of people, certainly of the people who are in front of us in these 6 university sites, because it's going to be their world, the world of tomorrow, not the world of Mr. Randy Rydell and myself. Our day is done. Mine is certainly done. Randy Rydell still has a few years to go. But the future of the world in outer space is your problem much more than it is mine. And so, may I address the question to you, Mr. Rydell? This is a world full of pregnant possibilities and dangers. And we have somehow tried to go into it without formulating the rules. It's too much of a free-for-all. How is it that we have not understood the dangers of a jungle which is unregulated and unruly? And what can be done about it? And are you worried about it in the Department of Disarmament? Over to you, sir.
Thank you. We coming through clearly now?
Yes.
Good. In order to answer this very important question, I would like to step back a little bit in time, back to the days of the origins of the UN, and in particular the signing of the UN Charter. The UN Charter was signed in June of 1946, 1 month before the first test of a nuclear weapon. So it's not only a pre-nuclear document, but it's a pre-space document as well. We didn't have space weapons, we didn't have rockets, we didn't have nuclear weapons when the Charter was signed. Now the Charter has got 2 different terms in it dealing with weapons. The first one is called disarmament. The second one is called regulation of armaments. And throughout the entire history of the UN, the world community has got to decide how it wants to treat different types of weapons. Do you wish to disarm? That means get rid of them, eliminate them, or prohibit them. Or do you wish to accept the weapons and try to regulate them in some way? Now, over the years, in the over 6 decades, the United Nations has developed the following formula. It says that we are seeking the total elimination, destruction, and prohibition of what are called weapons of mass destruction. It's nuclear weapons, chemical and biological. And then the regulation or limitation of all the other types of armaments for purposes of maintaining self-defense and allowing for international peacekeeping operations and the like. But the point of what I'm trying to say is that the United Nations has had to adapt to the fact that the world around it is changing. It's changing in terms of new weaponry, it's changing in terms of new science and technology. So when we think about space as a final frontier, we mean so geographically that yes, it is a final frontier. But when you think of international law, it has no final frontiers because international law is always changing to try to adapt to these new technological developments. Now, I want to be careful. There are 2 different terms here you're going to encounter in your work on space, on outer space. One is called weaponization. Another is called militarization. Weaponization technically means the placement of weapons in space or the use of space as a platform for attacking other satellites or targets on the ground. Militarization means the military uses of space, including that have nothing to do with weapons, like, for example, spy satellites, communications for military purposes, and things like that. The world community has largely accepted the fact that space has become militarized, but they have by no means accepted the fact that it must necessarily become weaponized. And the great issue now is to whether international law will, what course international law will take. Will it evolve in a direction that tries to regulate weapons in space, or will it seek the actual elimination and prohibition of weapons in space? That's a big juncture we're coming very, very quickly to now in the world community. Now, we all have heard of the various different worries that have been expressed about these weapons in space, or the danger of them arising. In 2001, a space commission chaired by Donald Rumsfeld warned darkly of the possibility of what he called a space Pearl Harbor, or an attack out of the blue, where all of our great space assets, our satellites and communications and financial relays would be blacked out, and it could cause chaos. And so he warned darkly about this, but his solution was not to ban weapons from space. His solution was to defend satellites better and to threaten military attacks against any state that would challenge these satellites. So that was his solution. Now, as I said, events have not stayed in place. Everything is continuing to evolve very, very rapidly. Let's take the last 2 months. In early February, Iran launches a satellite, its first satellite. Iran, which is a state under sanctions that deal also with its missile programs, was launching a satellite based on the technology of the missiles that they have. So that caused great concern in the world community and in the Security Council. A week later, the 10th of February, the most remarkable thing happened. A U.S. and a Russian satellite collided in space and left hundreds of thousands of little bits and pieces of parts that are still floating around up there. A month later, on the 13th of March, astronauts in the space station had to abandon their space station and go into a rescue pod because of a fear that they were going to be struck by a 4-inch piece of debris that had been floating around space, traveling at 22,000 miles an hour. And this shows you the dangers that they face up there. And of course, on the 5th of April, the North Koreans launch a missile that they claim are using to put a satellite, a communication satellite into space. By all indications, that launch was not successful as a satellite launcher, but it did demonstrate that they can double the range of their current rockets. So the basic problem we're facing here is that as satellites are becoming more valuable to us, they're also becoming more vulnerable. Valuable, vulnerable. Those are two very important words that help describe our situation now in space. So who cares? I mean, what difference does it make to you? Well, every time you do an electronic funds transaction or a cell phone or as Ambassador Kamal said, there's privacy issues involved. There's trillions of dollars of money that are controlled by these satellites. There's a huge industry of the satellite industry itself. And there's also military implications. If you have a crisis situation and some satellites are blacked out, you have satellite destruction could be an act of war. We could have a nuclear war as a result of tampering with satellites. So the stakes are really big here. Now, most of the work that is done in space, it takes place in what's called low Earth orbit, which is about between 100 miles and 1,200 miles. And this is also an area where there's a great deal of this space junk. And again, it's traveling at roughly 10 times the speed of a bullet. And there are an estimated 14,000 pieces that are larger than 4 inches wide floating around the Earth. And if you go down to 1 centimeter, that's about a third of an inch, there are over 270,000 of these pieces that are floating around up there at very, very high speeds.